It has now been 500 days since the first Russian missile strikes in Ukraine signaled the start of an invasion that most of the world expected would end in a victory for Vladimir Putin in a matter of days. I was on the ground in Ukraine that night, in a country fighting for its very survival, among citizens facing an uncertain future. I just returned from another trip to Ukraine, a nation still at war, its future still uncertain, but no longer just on the defensive. Its soldiers are now engaged in a grinding effort to reclaim occupied land, armed with equipment and training from the U.S.-led global coalition. It's a critical moment in this conflict. Ukraine's performance against the larger dug-in Russian force could determine the trajectory of a war that has left more than 9,000 civilians dead and forced 11 million Ukrainians, a quarter of the population, from their homes. With the counteroffensive in motion and ahead of President Biden's trip to Europe for the NATO summit, where leaders are expected to debate Ukraine's push to join the alliance, we met up with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the presidential offices in the heart of Kyiv, heavily fortified and surrounded by security. We spent more than an hour with the president talking about the war, the country's future, and the spirit of the Ukrainian people. We began by asking about the NATO summit and the counteroffensive. There's a NATO summit next week. Have you made up your mind whether you will go?
Vilnius summit is very important. If there is no unity regarding the technical invitation for Ukraine to join the alliance, it's all a matter of political will, just to find the proper wording and invite Ukraine. It would be an important message to say that NATO is not afraid of Russia. Ukraine should get clear security guarantees while it is not in NATO. And that is a very important point. Only under these conditions our meeting would be meaningful. Otherwise, it's just another politics.
So it sounds unlikely that you will go.
Why?
From what you just said.
I think we'll do a lot of work.
What does that mean? You'll do a lot of work.
We are working with our partners. We are working on security guarantees. We are also working on helping our partners to make some conclusions for this upcoming NATO summit meeting. And we would like to have all the decisions to be made during the summit. In this case, it's obvious that I'll be there and I'll be doing whatever I can in order to, so to speak, expedite that solution, to have an agreement with our partners. I don't want to go to Vilnius for fun if the decision has been made beforehand.
What is your assessment of how the counteroffensive is going right now?
All of us. We want to do it faster, because every day means new losses of Ukrainians. We are advancing, we are not stuck in one place. We've already overtaken the initiative. Several months ago, in some places in the east, we had to retreat. In some other communities, we would regain lost ground, but it was kind of a stagnation, meaning loss of manpower and equipment. And of course, we would all like to see the counteroffensive accomplished in a shorter period of time. But there is reality. Today, the initiative is on our side.
You've read Western officials, you've read others saying they wanted it to move faster. Did you feel pressure?
Well, I don't feel any pressure at all. They seem to understand how challenging and difficult it is, how difficult it is to survive and how difficult it is to fight, to seize initiative in our war with Russia, given the total strength of Russians and amount of equipment they have in their possession. So they are not pressuring me.
The counteroffensive now at a critical point, with some of the fiercest fighting yet. Inch by inch, Ukrainian soldiers trying to regain territory lost to the Russians in the south and east. General Alexander Syrsky in charge of the eastern flank, including the city of Bakhmut.
You think you can take Bakhmut?
Yes, of course. I sure.
In central Ukraine, we saw soldiers training for these battles, the military looking for help anywhere it can.
These are all border guard officers, law enforcement trained, but now they're training for combat.
Simulating an assault, seizing enemy positions, and practicing evacuating the wounded, which will almost certainly become a reality. Ukrainians suffering heavy losses in this counteroffensive.
The losses have been great.
Despite the Ukrainian casualties, the general said the enemy is suffering 8 to 10 times higher troop losses. General Alexander Tarnovsky, commanding troops in the south, telling me the full power of the Ukrainian military is yet to be seen.
The main assault is still yet to come in the counteroffensive?
I'm sure of that, he says. We haven't reached our full potential in terms of troops and equipment. And a big help, the Ukrainians believe, cluster munitions, which the Biden administration has just announced it will provide, despite the fact it is a weapon banned by most NATO allies. A move Andrei Yermak, Zelensky's top advisor, says will make a difference.
You know, we ask only things which are very important. And of course, now we need it to win this war.
Since the war began, the U.S. has promised more than $41 billion in aid to Ukraine, including Patriot defense systems, artillery, and Bradley fighting vehicles. But Ukraine has insisted that what it needs most is help from the sky. F-16 fighter jets the U.S. is allowing the allies to send have yet to arrive, even with the counteroffensive at a critical point.
You still don't have those F-16s, and there are other weapons you want as well. Can you succeed without them?
F-16 or any other equipment that we do need will give us an opportunity to move faster, to save more lives, to stand our ground for a longer time. But the most important thing is the spirit of our people.
But, Mr. President, you talk about lives being lost because it takes longer. And in the same breath, you want and wanted the weapons you have right away. So has the foot dragging from the allies or from the U.S. cost lives?
Some weapons we have been provided by our allies help us save lives, and I appreciate that. Of course, foot dragging will lead to more lives losses.
And losses are a daily occurrence, and not just for Ukrainian troops. The sirens, a stark reminder. The missiles, a constant fear. This week, the deadliest attack on civilians in Lviv since the war began. At least 10 killed.
We were just about a mile and a half from here when that missile struck that building in this apartment complex. We could hear the powerful blasts. You could feel the shockwaves.
76-year-old Halna showered with glass covered in blood. I was so frightened, she said. And 15-year-old David Ivanyk running scared from his apartment.
When I saw the rocket falling into this house, the explosion, the wave of the explosions just threw me away to...
It knocked you back?
Yes, it knocked me back to her house. And I was in shock, I think, didn't know what to do. Because it was really scary for me. It was a first-time experience.
And there is an even greater fear. Officials issuing dire warnings about a potential attack by the Kremlin on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which Russia has controlled since the early days of the war. President Zelenskyy concerned that Russia is prepared to blow up the power plant.
Yes, technically, they are prepared. Can we, while analyzing this, think that Russia is planning a local explosion in order to stop Ukrainian operations on the battlefield? Yes, as if they are going to lose more initiative than they have lost at the moment, They will make some additional steps in order to make the entire world to be afraid of the global nuclear disaster and halt all military actions on the battlefield.
If something happens at Zaporizhzhia, if they do use explosives, is Ukraine prepared for that?
Our appropriate institutions are ready. They continue working on that at the level of the Interior Ministry, the State Emergency Service. They are working on different scenarios. This is their task. This is their responsibility.
Zelenskyy says he does believe Putin has been weakened after Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin launched an attempted mutiny against top Russian military leadership. Prigozhin's whereabouts now unconfirmed, despite claims he is back in Russia after a brief stay in Belarus.
Are you concerned Prigozhin or his soldiers could come back into Ukraine?
Well, we are not afraid of Prigozhin. We were not afraid of him when he was standing, so to speak, strong in Bakhmut. I think that our armed forces are stronger because no matter how many members of Wagner Group were there, they couldn't prevail. But nevertheless, they were stronger than their own Russian army. Wagner was more powerful.
Why do you think he did this, and why did he stop?
As of today, he has become a political figure. And this, to me, must have been his primary objective. And that he has not gone till the very end, was it in his plans or no? Well, I don't know that for sure.
Putin is now trying to rally people around him, trying to show strength. And there are some analysts who even say in the short term, he might have gained from this. Do you think so?
And what is his strength? Well, first of all, he showed that Russian regions are not protected because mercenaries with some equipment and weapons were very close to Moscow. He has demonstrated to the entire world, and Ukraine in particular, that as a matter of fact, all of his troops are on the Ukrainian territory at the moment. He doesn't have military force inside Russia, and his civilian population is not protected. And he also demonstrated that there is a signal that there might be another mutiny in Russia, a revolution. More than that, there are many people who might support such a mutiny.
But with all the threats, all the loss, 500 days into the war, Zelenskyy remains adamant Ukraine will cede no territory to Russia.
6 months ago, you said you would not cede any territory to Russia to end this war. We're now 16 months in. Is your answer the same?
Yes.
No territory, no Crimea.
No territory. Crimea is our territory.
You met with the CIA director on what was supposed to be a secret trip.
That's a great secret. We began to speak about it, yeah.
It was the Washington Post. The Washington Post said, in that meeting, Ukrainian officials laid out a scenario that they thought would end the war, which was that by this fall, Ukrainian troops would advance to the edge of Ukraine's border with Crimea. You would agree not to take it by force and then push Moscow into negotiations. Is that a scenario that is feasible?
Це абсолютно зрозуміло.
Well, it's absolutely clear, logical rhetoric, that at that moment when Ukraine will reach the administrative border with the temporarily occupied Ukrainian peninsula, Crimea, it's very likely that Putin will be forced to seek dialogue with the civilized world, unlike it was before the full-scale invasion, because he will be more weakened, and he'll be seeking for some other ways, possibly diplomatic ways, and will likely be sending relevant messages.
So that is a feasible scenario.
Well, the war is to be over with justice and peace, and with us regaining our territorial integrity. Why? Because the end of the hot stage of the war and freezing the conflict would not mean the end of the war.
Tell me how you think Ukraine will be doing a year from now, 5 years from now. What is your place in the world?
Ukraine has already got a place in the world for itself. I consider that as a fact. We are now a country that is respected, a country that is really fighting for human values, for human rights, for freedom, for democracy, and everyone has already understood that it is exactly such a country. I assume that Ukraine will be a valued NATO country's partner with actually strongest armed forces in Europe. 90% of Ukrainians want to be part of NATO. More than 90% of Ukrainians want to be part of the European Union. After the war will take some time. We'll make necessary changes to our legal framework in order to finally become EU member state. I think that the country with such potential is important for the unity. And what is more important is that we are really a democratic nation that is dying for that on the battlefield.
As for future support from Americans, Zelenskyy is watching the U.S. elections closely, but says the choice is up to the American people.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
Donald Trump says he would end the war in 24 hours if he was elected president.
It seems to me that the sole desire to bring the war to an end is beautiful. But this desire should be based on some real-life experience. Well, it looks as if Donald Trump had already these 24 hours once in his time. We were at war, not a full-scale war, but we were at war, and as I assume, he had that time at his disposal. But he must have had some other priorities. If we are talking about ending the war at the cost of Ukraine, in other words, to make us give up our territories, well, I think in this way Biden could have brought it to an end even in 5 minutes. But we would not agree.
What would you say to those Americans who say, we've given enough, we have our own problems, we can't continue to do that?
I would like to say thank you to all Americans for what you have done. And I appreciate those who say that you've done enough. Trust me, no matter what, I appreciate help. When it comes to the word enough, well, we Ukrainians are not people known for excessive appetites. Our victory is enough for us. Honestly, when we have enough for our victory, then it will be enough.
And to see more of our reporting from Ukraine, be sure to watch 500 Days of War, debuting Monday night on ABC News Live at 8:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.